Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Living the Noahide Life. Tonight, we've got a Shavuos special. Rabbi Moshe Shulman has prepared some wonderful material. As always, I always look forward to the time I get to spend with him and share it with yourselves. I'm sure he's going to tell us all about the festival and its implications, and I know he's got it tailored specifically for us Noahide, and it's going to come from a learned position. So without any more delay, Rabbi Shulman, how are you doing today, sir? Always a joy to be with you. And I apologize once again for last week's broadcast. I had some software glitch that I couldn't figure out at the moment. It happened last second. Everything seems okay tonight, and we're back on normal.
Okay, it's good to hear. We have a Shavuos special. This week, Friday, Thursday night, Friday is Shavuos.
And it runs for 2 days?
In Israel, it's only 1 day, but those of us who live outside of Israel, it runs for 2 days. So for us, it's going to be Friday and Shabbos. In Israel, it's just Friday, and then Shabbos is Shabbos. So it's a little bit different because the Torah only has 1 day for every yontiv, whereas those of us who live in the exile, we have 2 days. Okay, what I want to do is we're going to discuss what these holidays are, what the holidays about, with a view towards trying to see if there's anything that a Noahide can see within it that might be relevant for them, that they might consider specifically as being Noahides and not being Jewish. Since the holidays were basically commanded to the Jewish people, so, the question is what is there that we have there that might be relevant for somebody who is a Noahide and not Jewish.
Right, but we're not commanded to follow it. It's not something specific, but there is probably some logical imperative in there that just makes good sense, doesn't it?
Well, we'll discuss, see what it is. I'm trying to see if I can get all the comments that might come in. Oh, I don't see anybody commenting here. Maybe I'm not looking at the right one.
I have the YouTube link, and we're joined by Scotty and a few others. We got a half a dozen so far on YouTube, Rabbi, and
I'm at
Noahide on Facebook so far.
I'm at Noahide World Center. I can't see how many people are on it, but I don't see any comments.
Not on the Facebook channel at the moment, but there's several already on the YouTube channel or YouTube link.
Let me go to YouTube and see what's there. If I see if I can get YouTube link. Now let's see if I can get. I don't see comments here. Let's do it. Let's see if we can get a comment. I don't know how to see. Let's see if we can see the comments here.
Got a hello there from our friend Scotty down in Tennessee, and we're joined by somebody who's got the handle Shepherd's Outcry and a few others, Rabbi.
I don't know how to get the comments here. Okay.
In the chat box. Now, I can probably work something out where I string it right into the broadcast.
Yeah, that would be whatever. If it's doable. If it's not, it's not.
I can't do both. And we're joined by, believe it or not, our friend Abe Sorch on Facebook now. Abe's in just outside of Chicago.
Okay, let's see what we can do. Let me go back to Facebook here. If you start on Facebook, let me see if I can see here. No, I don't see it. Okay. Oh, well, okay. I'm not going to waste people's time, which is a very common thing. Okay. So
we never consider it a waste of time when we spend time with you, Rabbi. We know you studied the Torah. It's just a joy and an honor to actually have you be willing to share this with us. It means a lot to me. I'm appreciative.
Okay, let's deal with Shavuos. Now, it doesn't appear very many times, although it is discussed in Shemos. I'll give the English names: Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and also it makes an appearance in the second book of Chronicles. So it actually comes out. Now, primarily, the first time we hear it mentioned in the Torah specifically is in Exodus 34:22. So let me get up to there right here. And here's what it says. First, it talks about Passover. Then it says, you should make the holiday of Shavuos. The first fruits of the cutting of your wheat, your grains.
What verse are we on, Rabbi?
22. 34:22.
34:22. Forgive me, I was in chapter 22.
So we see here that as from the very beginning, the first actual place where it's actually mentioned in chapter 34, it mentions the number one thing being a holiday of the first fruits that come. Now, if you remember, we of course, we're mostly city folks, so we don't really know. There's a joke of, somebody asks a little kid, where does milk come from? And says it comes from the store.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're so, Rabbi, I moved from Southern Ontario, which is just above New York State. I moved to the prairies in Canada, right above North Dakota, and it is total farmland. And yeah, I could say I had no clue how much was involved in those farms.
So anyway, this time of the year, of course, before the summer, is when fruits, when things are starting to ripen, and so you cut down the first, and you bring it. It's called Bekirim, is the first fruits that you bring to the temple. There's a whole thing about that. But Shavuos is essentially the first thing we read about. Is it has to do with the time when you're supposed to bring the first fruits. Now, in Exodus, it doesn't tell us very much when this is, what time it is, what time of the year it is. It doesn't give any specifics. It just tells you that Passover is in like the springtime, and Shavuos is going to be the Festival of Weeks. The name why it's called Shavuos, which means weeks, you're not told yet. And it just told you're supposed to bring the first fruits of your harvest. Now, there's two parshas in the Torah where it talks about all the holidays. One parsha is in Leviticus, Vayikra, which we're going to do now. It's parshas Emor. And with that particular parsha, it goes through all the holidays there are and talks about them, most at length. Excuse me. And then in Numbers, in Bamidbar, there's a second one, parshas Pinchas, where it again goes through the holidays and discusses it more primarily about the issue of what kind of offerings are brought in the temple. So let's go to the next source, which is in Leviticus 23, Vayikra 23.
Okay, I will go to Leviticus. Rabbi, this verse in Exodus does mention the Feast of the Ingathering at the turn of the year, and it mentions first fruits of wheat harvest in English. Like I'm not reading.
Okay, the ingathering is at the end of the year is when, not the beginning of the harvest, the end of the harvest, which is the end of the summer, which of course is a holiday of Sukkot. Trying to put it in the pronunciation that you guys are more used to. Because if I say Sukkot and stuff like that might confuse some people out there, but Sukkot, that's more Israeli. So, okay. So here we see in Leviticus 23.
23.
And let's start actually, it starts off talking about there's going to be certain festivals. The first one in verse 4 talks about Passover. Verse 9, it talks about the Omer. The Omer is the first sheaves that start to grow. It's the new growth that happens from the planting. Okay, so let's
bring it under the priest. Yes.
I'm going to here. Moshe Laimor, Shem said to Moshe to say to the Jewish people. David ben Yisrael said to the children of Israel. I'm saying to them, that when you come into the land, that I will give to you, meaning that this is going to start from the time they go into the land on. The Getatim is Ketzira, when you cut down your cuttings, Vavisem, as Omer, Reishes. You should bring the first Omer, the first thing you're cutting, Ketzarcham El Kohen, to the Kohen. So this was supposed to occur. That after the Shabbos, we're going to learn what this means from actually the Sefer Yeshua, that after it, you are supposed to do with your will to bring it to the Kohen. The Kohen's going to lift it up. And on that day, you bring an offering of an animal. And your mincha always means an offering of meal. Meal. It's called mincha. It's meal. It's like flour. Sorry, meal flour. Sorry. Okay. Mixed together with oil. It's burnt up. And also, you should pour wine, a quarter of a hin. Notice, remember we were talking last week about the types of avodas. You basically see what it is here. Okay, you have an avoda from an animal that's a sacrifice.
Right.
You have an avoda from a mincha, a meal offering, which is also brought, which is the second one we talked about, a sacrifice, which is none of that. Then notice the fourth one, nisko yayin, a pouring of wine. So you have a libation also. You see all these. Okay, so when we talked about last week or the last couple of weeks, when we talked about the specific services, the things you do that are always considered as a violations, because that's what was done in the temple, in the Mishkan temple. So that's where it comes from. V'lechem kali and bread from kali and caramel, which are two types of thing kernels. Okay, so now the important thing is it says here that after the Shabbos here, which we know means Passover, we're going to see why. If you look at Joshua 5:11, you will see.
Verse 11 reads, "And they did eat of the produce of the land on the morrow."
Okay, so they went to Gilgal, and it says there like this: and they ate in the other side by the land after Passover. So they ate after the Passover. Okay?
Unleavened cakes.
Which is exactly what it's talking about here, but here it calls it Shabbos, there it calls it Passover. That's why we know it's the first day of Passover it's talking about. Pesach means the first day of Passover. It means Pesach. I mean, the rabbis have other things, but biblically that's where you can see it comes from.
And parched corn in the same day.
Yeah, that's why we need an oral law, because, a lot of times they don't have things like that. Sometimes you'll find it mentioned somewhere
bits,
where
not
they
the
knew
whole
it
thing,
was.
yeah.
But orally, they of course know what it means Shabbos. There's different types of Shabbos. Holidays are called Shabbos. Shabbos itself is not called just Shabbos, it's called Shabbos Shabusan. It's Shabbos of Shabbos. And Yom Kippur is also called it. Okay, so we finished the first part, the Omer offering, which is the day after Passover. What's important about this is because we start from the next one in 15. Is Shabbos, you should count to yourself the day after the Shabbos, means the day after Passover, we've seen there. Yom Yacham is Omer, from the time that you bring the Omer, which is the day after Tanifa, Shabbos Shabbos Demitzion, 7 complete weeks. So from that time, you're supposed to count 7 weeks. And you can count 50 days, and you bring a new mincha for Hashem, a new mincha offering for Hashem, a new flour offering to Hashem. Now, it's 50 days, that's why in English you'll see it translated as Pentecost. Pentecost is from 5. I mean, I don't know English very well, but Pentecost probably means 5 weeks, 50 days or something like that, whatever. Anyway, so that's what it is, 50 days later. Okay? Now, it comes out that 50 days later, the way our calendar is set up, it's always the 6th day of Sivan.
Beautiful. Always.
Always. Now, it wasn't always that way when we were able to do things by seeing the sighting of the new moon, but since then, it's been so. Okay. You should bring a bread for waving, shtayim, 2. Measurement. It should be made from chumetz and not matzah. So it has to be leavened. Okay, and be maneuvered. So we see here a few things here going on. What else does it say here? So it brings different types of sacrifice item. So it brings its offerings. Again, usually the offerings are an animal, a wheat offering, a flour offering, and something to be poured.
Now, Rabbi, one person's asking, why is it called a wave offering in English? It uses the phrase
Because
wave.
they lift it up. Part of it's lifting up, and then
so when they bring that,
they actually wave it. The omer is waved. It's like you're offering it up, so you just give it a shake. Okay, so you bring a chatas. Chatas is a purification. Chatas is usually translated sin, but it really means for purification, either purification from sin or just regular purification. And Shulman is an offering of peace. Behind a kohen oisam, and he's going. The kohen's going to lift it up. That day will be a day called holy. You should not do any work, type of work. And it's a law forever.
A law forever.
Right, yeah. And it also mentions another thing which has to do with your harvest. Since it's the beginning of the first fruits, it answers another thing with as kitzur sechem, and you start harvesting your land. You should not harvest it to the very ends of the field.
Right.
That was and you should also right? But you should leave it to the poor person and the ger convert. You should leave it for them. So it starts giving the laws, and we get these laws later on, but it starts giving the laws of the land that you're supposed to leave up. Since it's talking about the harvest, it mentions also two special laws about the land. Pay was the end of your field, and laikit means if there's something left over on the stock, you leave it for them to take.
Well, that's the social system.
Yeah, these are discussed in the Mishnayos in Masechtas Peah, and
so people wouldn't starve in the land.
Well, people who are poor would be able to do it. That was part of what it is. Okay, so we see here, as far as the offering is concerned, in Leviticus, there's a few things we have to know about. Number one, it now tells us when it is. It tells us that it is the 50th day after Passover. So you count 50 days, and that's when it comes up. Number two, it tells you that there's for Shavuos, there's a very special offering. Every holiday has its animals it's supposed to be given with certain numbers, whatever. But there's the special offering here is because it's dealing with the first of the harvest, the special offering is 2 breads, 2 leavened breads. 2 breads. That's the special offering for that. And it has, of course, various sacrifices. And here, of course, it brings for the first time the discussion that on that holiday, which is only one day, you are forbidden to do work. Interesting enough, with regards to this, a lot of questions are asked. One of the other names for Shavuos is called Etzeres. Etzeres means it's something that's held back or a convocation. Now, after Sukkot, the last day is the 8th day from that is called Shmini Etzeres, the 8th day being held back. So many of the works talk about that there's a relationship between that, whereas for Passover we have these days between it, 7 weeks. For Sukkot you have 7 days, and then it's that. So it's sort of a relationship between them as far as numerical things are concerned. But essentially, you have Passover, and 50 days later you come back for Shavuos. Okay. So that's basically we see here that essentially whatever we're doing here as far as in the temple and stuff like that is related to the harvest. Now again, for us, I mean, you probably notice it because this time of year you can start, you start getting fruits and vegetables that you couldn't get usually.
Right. After winter stock has dwindled.
Although of course in New York, what happens is we get it imported from outside. So somewhere in the world it's always sort of spring, summer. So it's always somewhere else in the southern hemisphere or something like that, or from here. So all year round you can get things that there was a time that you could, of course, only get at certain times of the year, and you live that way. But nowadays, in places with big places like New York, it's not like that. But again, it's very important to recognize, and a lot of people don't recognize this, especially for Shavuos. Shavuos is the one holiday that it's the least recognized as far as the relationship between the cycle of the year with the agricultural cycle of the year. Because the agricultural cycle, if you really learn the Torah correctly, you see that the agricultural cycle is very important because Jewish people were given land to work on, and the land was divided. There's a whole bunch of talking about the land and that, and there's a number of laws that have to do with it. So the whole cycle of the year is around that, even though each of the holidays has its own little thing associated with it.
The cycle is important,
right,
and knowing,
So for example, Sikkahs, you live in a Sikkah, and you have the four things you're supposed to have, the four minim, four types. Okay, Passover has you eat matzah, you don't eat chumetz, so they have things associated. Shavuos, the Torah doesn't say explicitly. We're going to prove out actually how that it's actually related to something which is very important. But we want to know really what it's about, because remember, a Noahide, you're allowed to learn the Torah anytime you want. So any kind of issue that's in the Torah that's there, that's related to a holiday, you might want to look it over before it happens, even though, most Jewish people think about totally different things when it comes to Shavuos. But in the Torah itself, the primary thing when there was a temple was actually because of the agricultural cycles. The agricultural cycle was the beginning of the year. It's, we're now bringing you're now able to get your grapes and your stuff like that really fresh that you couldn't get before, okay? So that's really what it was about. So again, we have probation from work, certain sacrifices which are very common for every Yom Tov. I mean, there's sacrifices every single day, but there's common for every Yom Tov. And then the specific offering, which was special for that, was 2 loaves of bread.
2.
Okay? And this occurred, again, 49 days, the 50th day after Passover, counting from the day after Passover, which would be the 16th of Nisan. And you count 49 days, and the day after that is then Shavuot. Okay, so we see here clearly a discussion that it has to do with with the agricultural things. Very important.
Definitely. I mean, let's face it. Like you mentioned today, things are a little different. Everything's shipped about all around the globe. But for 1900 years and for thousands of years before that, agriculture was key.
Yeah, we don't nowadays recognize when there's droughts and stuff in places where things are hard, because all we get is fruit. We get fruits and vegetables anyways, which just becomes more expensive for us. That's how we don't recognize. If there's a drought, it doesn't mean that we're not going to get it. It's just that. Okay, so that was what it is in Vayikra and Leviticus. Now it's again mentioned in Numbers, chapter 28.
Numbers 28.
Yes, 28, and we're going to go around verse 26. But again, I just want to point out here, again, it's going to tell all the holidays. It brings Shabbos first, Rosh Chodesh, and then it brings Passover. The passage on Passover is much longer than you saw before, because it talks about all the many sacrifices you have to do. And then it's starting on verse 26, it starts. Now, Shavuos has another name, and this is very important. Iviyom habekirim, in the day of your first fruits.
First fruits.
Why is it called the first fruits? What it's talking about is the first things that have started to grow. When you bring your new mincha, which is of course what we're going to in Vayikra, same language, in your weeks. Okay. Okay, so it tells you you're not supposed to do any work. Okay, that's in this portion, which is Parshas Pinchas. There's a lot of emphasis on the point that you're not allowed to do any work, and also the sacrifices. These two things are mentioned.
Servile work is what it says in English. And is a specific type of work you're not supposed to do, or is that all work in general?
Well, anything that you really, it's just like things you would be forbidden to do on Shabbos, you would be forbidden to do with here. But anything that has to do with making a meal, for example, anything for food wise and that kind of stuff, it's a little bit complicated. And since the Noahides don't have to worry about it, I'm not going to give you a 3-hour lecture on that kind of thing that you don't have to worry about too much. But you get used to it. Okay, so it says Purim ben Abuka, Shleim, Ayalechad, Shavuos the Noahide. You have to recognize the sacrifices that were made. They didn't waste the animals. The priest got to eat them. So it was basically, the priest who ate them. Certain sacrifices the person themselves got to eat, Shulman, things like that, Toida. But there were specifically sin sacrifices that were brought. Those were eaten by the priests.
How many would be brought, Rabbi? Like, this is a huge question. Like, if it says, bring a ram and bring a bullock in verse 28, how many of these offerings were brought?
They're gonna have it. It's summertime. One season, so they have a barbecue before the baseball games that they had. In the temple, and the temple court was very large. It was, they're gonna have a baseball game there. No,
well, it wasn't just like one bull or anything like that. This was multiple.
But remember, there's also priestly families. There's a lot of people.
Right.
So it gets divided amongst them.
I'm just trying to imagine the scale, Rabbi. That's all. Forgive me.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of sacrifices done. The mincha is flour that was mixed together with oil. Tells you how much you're supposed to have with each one. Not really important to you. So it says, in addition to the daily sacrifice, because remember, every day has certain sacrifice called oilus tumid. Once in the morning, once by night, there was an animal bought. It was called an oila, and it was burnt totally. The beginning of the day, because it was only for Hashem. It was something given only for Hashem. The money for that came from the shekel offering that they gave, machzos shekel, the half a shekel that was given. That was used, among other things, to buy the daily sacrifice offering. So that was something that all the people had, and it was given Hashem once, twice a day. Okay, so that's what you see. You don't see very much. Most importantly, what you see here again is, well, we call it Shavuos. The Torah says, B'yom HaBakirim, the day of your first fruits, your first fruits offerings. In Deuteronomy, there's a whole thing about bringing your first fruits. You go with the bad thing. It's a whole thing you're supposed to do when you bring your own first fruits to the temple. So we see again the emphasis clearly in the open things in the Torah is to us to recognize these cycles. And sometimes you have to think about this. Everything comes from Hashem. All over agriculture stuff. Whether you're going to have a good harvest or not, what's going to happen. Rosh Hashanah, there's a very famous prayer on Rosh Hashanah that we say in the Son of Toikev, where what part of it says that we talk this year, who's going to live, who's going to die, where's going to be peace, where's going to be war, where's going to be this, where's that. It's a beautiful prayer. But the point of it is that, when you want to get something to eat, want to get some fruit, you run to the store. You don't think about it, really, that everything's come from the field, and yet we have, it's important to emphasize and understand that we are, we rely on Hashem for everything. Mm-hmm. What kind of panusa you're going to have.
Don't take it for granted.
Whenever you start taking things for granted, then something's going to happen, and Hashem, sort of wakes you up. But, so the whole cycles of the year that go on dealing agricultural stuff, which is fundamental here, is because fundamental to faith in Hashem is the recognition that your whole living, your whole life, your existence in this world is really dependent on Him. You really have. So
100%.
So one of the reasons why they talk about giving the first fruit is because the first things you give, you always give to Hashem, to show your recognition of Hashem. That listen, you know what? It all comes from you. Now nowadays it doesn't make sense. I mean, what are you going to do? You go into a store and the first grape that you buy from the grapes for the year, we don't have that. We don't live in that type of a society today that we have a certain awareness. But the holiday for Shavuos, fundamentally, that's what's to remind us that we basically depend on Hashem. Okay, so
Can I ask a question relevant but not directly? Since things have changed in this world and there's a reliance on finances, we know that with this COVID, a lot of people are out of work. A lot of people are restricted from working.
Right.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to realize that everything comes from Hashem. But when you think back, like we know the prophets do say that the day will come where we beat our swords into plowshare, spears into pruning hooks, and learn war no more. But I think that involved in that is a return to a degree of understanding the honest labor and drawing from what Hashem legitimately provides. Is there a distortion?
Clearly what you're talking about is obviously Messianic era, which, in Tanakh talk I talk more about that kind of stuff. So, but in a sense, what the Messianic era really is, and what we're leading to, is a time of world peace, where in fact there won't be any kind of jealousies. There'll be abundance, and so these things that's essentially what that's. Excuse me. That's essentially what the purpose of that is that there will be abundance of everything in the world, so that, as Jewish people, we'll be able to learn Torah more and do, rather than doing other things. But again, we'll do Torah mitzvahs, which means we'll have the land back. Of course, I won't, because I'm a Levite, and so I will be doing other things. But yeah, again, it's very important to understand things on the simplest level of what the Torah is talking about, because in rabbinic literature you see a lot of people who talk about all kinds of things that
profound,
confusing sometimes. More than that, but it's very important, especially as Noahide, get the simple basics down, okay, and understand where it comes from, because even those things with Kabbalah and stuff like that, all these things are really rooted in is a clear understanding of the simple meaning. Then you can understand where these things come about. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Just like a tree grows. Yeah.
Right. So the next passage we find again is a very short mention of it in Deuteronomy, Devarim 16. And again, it says
what verse?
16:9. Shiva Shavias Tisbelecho, you should count 7 weeks. Chol Chemesh Hakoma Chol Ispa Shiva Shavias. From when you first, cut again, right? Again, this is referring again to what we talked about the Omer. When we first talked in the first passage of the Omer, it's talking about in Vayikra. That's what it's talking about. Okay. So it's a Chag HaShvius. You should call it, now it's called Chag HaShvius because it's here. We're not talking about the first fruit part of it as much as it was in Bamidbar. We're emphasizing the first fruit. Parshas Pinchas is more emphasis of that kind of thing. So there they talk about that. Here we go back more towards what it's talking about in Vayikra, in Leviticus, which is dealing with the weeks, the counting of the weeks. So we call it Shavuos, because Shavuos means weeks. So that's just why you have these two different things, because it's a holiday which deals with both of them, but it's a different emphasis. Here it's emphasizing its relationship, connection to Passover, where it starts there, so it talks about weeks. Whereas in Vayikra, it's not talking about that. It's talking about it itself. Its main thing was the sacrifices, and the main thing that it's talking about is that it's the time of your first fruits and that kind of stuff. So in Numbers and Bamidbar, it talks something different. All these things this is really simple. This is like, you learn it, you never think about it, but really that's really simple. It's really simple what's talking. So it says that after 7 weeks.
In verse 10, yeah. What's that free will offering of your hand in verse 10?
That means you bring what you want. You bring what you from your first. It doesn't say how much. It doesn't say how much you're supposed to bring. You bring from yourself. You bring according to how Hashem blessed you. How much you're going to give to him?
Joyfully. Yeah.
Yeah. So joy. There's a whole thing in here about that. I'm not going to. You should be joyful before Hashem. This is where it talks about that. Why? Again, we forget about this sometimes.
Whole purpose.
You get paid once a week, whatever. How many people, when they get the check, start dancing in joy and thanking Hashem for that they have a paycheck every week? I mean, we don't think about these things. And agriculturally, people within agriculture, because the element, you're totally dependent on the elements, So, again, all these things, the bottom line for all these things is really strengthening our faith in Hashem, obviously. But
wow. So it's there in verse 11.
yeah, so that's what's because you're supposed to give to everybody else. And then it ends up very interestingly, because this is very important. Zchartu ki eved huisu b'mitzroim v'shematu v'yasisu es hatikim hu'aylan. It says you should remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that's why you're doing this. So essentially what it is, there's one way of looking at it. We know that there's actually the halacha is that you are required to give sustenance to your slaves. So in a sense, when we went out of Egypt, when the Jewish people went out of Egypt, we went from the servitude from Egypt to be basically servants of Hashem. And as such, he provides for us. But we should have to, think about, what he does. But in a sense, this happens to the whole world. The whole world, comes around this time of year. You're supposed to think about it. You're supposed to have joy. And you're supposed to thank Hashem for all of the things that he does for you.
Amen. Amen. That's beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. 11 and 12 for sure gives a lot of reason.
Okay. So now let's go. Let's see what the Talmud has to say about this. Okay.
I don't have that open, Rabbi, so I'm relying on you.
Okay. Now, Shavuos is not really talked about too much in the Torah. In the Talmud, it doesn't come up very much because it's one of the sacrifices. So sacrifices usually come out in different places in the Talmud, but it's not really. But there is a discussion here in the Talmud, which I want to find it. Where is it? Hi, Tana. The by Rabbi Yishmael. This Tana, he's talking about somebody is the one who follows Rabbi Yishmael, one of the great rabbis. The Tana of Rabbi Yishmael. It was taught in the Beis Medrash, in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. But Abba Perukim Oilam Nidin. There are 4 times in the year, this is in the tractate Rosh Hashanah, by the way, which has a lot of interesting. There are 4 times in the year when we're judged. Okay?
So 4,
Pesach,
not just Rosh Hashanah.
The Pesach, on Passover, Al Taviyah, on the grains. If it's Sedis, meaning in Shavuos, Al Payas U'ilin, on the fruits of the trees. I talked about other things. It talks about these here. So the rabbis, understanding from what it says here in the biblical, that refers to time of harvest, time of joy before Hashem, such things like that, recognize in it that there is a relationship. When Hashem wants you to do these, it's because a certain type of a judgment on the world. Hashem is actually judging the world whether you're going to have these fruits. Your harvest starts in the beginning, but what happens if there's a hurricane or a tornado in the middle of it? Everything gets wiped out. So it's the very beginning of it. It's the very beginning of it. Okay?
Wow.
It continues later on. So we have a teaching for Rabbi Akiva a little bit later on the same idea. Rabbi Akiva says, why does the Torah say to bring the Omer on the first day of Passover? We talked about the Omer, the first sheet.
That he waves, yes.
Why? Because that's the time of the grains. Because it's the time of the grains, it's when the grains are being judged. Okay, it's times of grains to be done. So what do you do? You should bring that offering to me so that I can bless what's in the field from the grains, because that's when you bring the first grain. That's when you do the first thing. The Omer offering is related to the grain. So that's why that's time of year when you're being judged on that. Rabbis understand it's not just, it's not just made what is written now, because that's time of year when certain things are going on, and that means a judgment. Okay, so we have, let's say this. Why do we have to bring 2 breads? What's the reason why I bring these 2 breads? What's going on here? What does the two breads have to do with our agricultural life here? What's got to do with it?
Two different types. Yeah, I have no clue.
But I
I've never heard this before.
Because that's the time when the fruits of the trees are being judged. It says, you should bring these two breads in order that I should bless the fruits of the trees. The Meforshim say the reason why is because there's a whole discussion on what was the actual thing that was eaten by Adam and Chava in the and one of the things that it is actually they ate wheat. As it grows. It grows somewhat. So the rabbis see in here a relationship to the harvest, in that it tells us that it's a time when we're supposed to pray that things should come out good, specifically the fruits of the trees. Okay?
Which is, yeah, it sets the tone for the whole season.
Right. Okay, now let's move on. I think we're going to go over an hour today. I hope you don't mind.
All good with me, Rabbi.
I realize I'm only on my second page, but
you take as much time as you need.
Okay, so now the next thing. Let's go back to the biblical case. Okay, in the biblical text, it's quite clear that the open reason, one open thing for the holiday, the main open thing, deals with the issues of the harvest. By the way, we actually haven't forgotten about that. Although that's not the main emphasis. If you speak Jewish people about Shavuos, that's not their main emphasis. The actual reading that we have on when we read the Torah is actually dealing with harvest type things. Okay, so it's not what we forget about.
At the end of the summer, right?
So if you would speak to most of the Jewish friends you have, you say, well, what's the big thing about Shavuos? Shavuos is when the Torah was given. That's a very nice thing to say, but how do we know it? Well, the biblical text that talks about the giving of Torah, of course, is in Exodus 19 through 20. That's where it's talked about. It's mentioned again later on, obviously in Deuteronomy, but the place where we see it actually mentioned as a historic event is actually in Deuteronomy. Parshas Yisro.
Which chapter, Rabbi?
Starting chapter 19. Okay? And in it, we learn about the Torah. Now, the Torah says specifically in the third month, which would be Sivan. So we see already here that the Torah is given sometime around the same time in Shavuos. The Torah doesn't say specifically it is, but it seems around the third month, and we see there's a few days going on here. It looks like it's around the thing, but it's not explicitly mentioned. The explicit mention is dealing with specifically with the harvest things, but not with the Torah.
That's key.
So now, how do we know that it's actually related? Remember, Shavuos comes out on the 6th of Sivan, and in exile we keep the 6th and the 7th. So how do we know that it's actually the same thing? So the Talmud actually has an analysis of this, and we're going to go through the text and see how it is. Okay? First of all, it starts off, verse 1, in the third month from when the Jewish people left Egypt, which would be the month of Sivan, in that day, meaning the beginning of the month, that means on the first day of Sivan, the Jewish people arrived in the desert. Okay? Fine. Verse 2, it tells where they went to. Verse 3, okay, so then Moshe goes up to Hashem when? The next morning. To come on the day, he's always up to go in the morning. So that would be which day? The second day of Sivan.
Second day, yep.
Right, okay. And we see in verses 4 through 8, we see Hashem gives to Moshe a message that he's supposed to give to Jewish people. Okay, so he does that. that you're supposed to listen to what I say, and I'm going to make a covenant with you, and you're going to be a special people from all the nations of the world, etc., etc. And then Moshe goes down.
Came and called for the elders.
Right, and we see Moshe. Right. So at the end of verse 6, it says, this is what you should tell the Jewish people. So Moshe goes down, still the same day. He calls the people, he tells them everything Hashem said. And the people answer, Nasam Nishma, we will do whatever you say and we will hear. Okay? That is all on the second day of Sivan. Okay? Now, let's go. Okay, so after they say that, we see at the end of verse 9, Vayushav Moshe as Divrei Huam El Hashem. And Moshe brought back what the Jewish people said. That would be the morning of the next day. Moshe always goes up in the morning. Just like when in Egypt, you meet Paro only in the morning, he goes in the morning. He's talking with him all day long. Then the next morning he goes up. So next day he goes up is the 3rd of Sivan.
And the thick cloud.
Right, he goes up there. Okay. Okay, so then Hashem tells him, listen, I'm going to come in a cloud. And okay. So at the end of that verse, V'yagid Moshe as Divrei Huam El Hashem. He says that he's giving everything over to Hashem. Right?
In verse 10?
In verse 10. In verse 10. One second. Okay, so 1 second. This is a little bit tricky. Right? So this is on the second day. Moshe goes down on the second day. Right? But at the end, right, Moshe goes up on the third day. Hashem talks to him and he goes down on the third day. And then Vayagid Moshe Divrei Huam, the fourth of Sivan, is when he goes up to tell Hashem again, because he does in the morning. The third day he goes down, and he tells them what Hashem was saying to them, but there's no new answer that we know of in the Torah. But and then he comes back up on the fourth day. So he's back up on the fourth day. That's verse 99, end of 99. Okay, then we hear on verse 10. But Hashem tells Moshe that they make themselves holy and wait for the third day, which should be, there's a disagreement as to what it means, if it means 5, 6, 7 or 4, 5, 6. How it's going to include. Okay, there's this disagreement between the Rabbunim and Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says it's on the 7th of Sivan, and the Rabbunim say it's on the 6th of Sivan.
Okay. Because it only says today and tomorrow in verse 10.
Right. Well, we know that Moshe added a day. Today would have been the 4th and the 5th, but Moshe added the third day. He's ready for the third day, so it makes it the 6th or the 7th, depending on what. It's an argument. It's not really very interesting. There's a lot of droshim on that.
Well, it says let them wash their garments, which could be understood.
Yeah. No, another thing, the language is very difficult. Okay, but then he goes down, it tells them what to do, how to watch themselves out, and then we find that in verse 16, it's the third day, whether the third day was the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan, depending on how what it was. That's when the Torah, we get another thing the Torah is given. So from the verses in the Torah itself, the way the rabbis understand it, it comes out that the 6th of Sivan is actually the 50th day. They come to be the same thing.
Is this why they hold it for 48 hours, Rabbi? Like from the Thursday to the Saturday this week?
No. The reason why we have a second day is because we're in exile. And if you lived in Israel, you'd only have to keep one because you'd be that. It has to do with the fact that when they reported when was the new moon, those people who would know when the new moon would be able to keep the holiday on one day because they know which day it was. Those who live too far away, they wouldn't know. But they know approximately what it looks like from that, so they would keep 2 days. So we keep 2 days. It's our custom to do it, even though we know when the new moon is, because but that's whole Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. Chapter going to talk about that. But again, what we see with a little bit of help from the rabbis is that when the Torah clearly puts it in Sivan, which is when the 50th day is, but the rabbis bring it together and show, if you read carefully the verses, the actual Torah verses make it so that the day when the Torah was given is the exact same time when Shavuos is. That's why the biggest thing that people do on Shavuos, of course, but if you know Orthodox Jews, it's mostly about that, the learning of the Torah.
Beyond the agricultural end.
Right. Beyond the agricultural, right. Okay. Okay, so that's Shavuos. Now the question is, since it's for Noahides, I'm not giving you a shir in my yeshiva, but I mean, all these stuffs are basically on the verse. I mean, if you read the verses, of course, you can, things to do, why.
Oh, thank you. I love how you laid it out for us.
Okay, so now, what is the relationship for a non-Jew? Okay, where non-Jews come into it? So, there's an interesting Gemara in Bava Kama, and it also appears in Avodah Zarah. It's a discussion with Hashem and the non-Jewish nations. Specifically, they're talking about Edom and Paras, which is Persian Rome. But it applies Rome, where it says that Hashem mentions that he went to all the nations to see if they would accept the Torah, and they didn't. Everyone wants to get the Torah except the Jewish people. So the Gemara there, and this is brought in Bava Kama, and I'm talking about advisors over here, specifically talks about that as an introduction to it, how the nations could have taken Torah that didn't want to. The Gemara here mentions a specific teaching from Rabbi Yosef, which is very important. We have mentioned this before, but the course is in a couple of places. It's Rabbi Yosef Omer b'yamoided et uretz v'vasel goyim. That Hashem looked about and he measured the land and he saw what the nations were doing. So Rabbi says, what did he see? He saw that there were 7 mitzvahs that Noah accepted upon himself. But they didn't keep it. As we obviously see, there's enough stories about idol worship and things. We don't see that it wasn't kept. It's called Kaiman. That Hashem said to him, said, you know what? If they're not going to keep it, I'm going to nullify it so that it doesn't affect anyone. They don't have it anymore. So according to the Gemara, it seems that the 7 laws of Noah were nullified, meaning they are no longer that. The Gemara talks about what it means. It means that if they do it, they don't get any reward. So the Gemara asks a question, very famous question. Rabbi Maya says that a non-Jew who learns Torah, meaning learns Torah from the 7 mitzvahs, as we see in the other place where it's talked about in Sanhedrin, that if he learns the 7 mitzvahs, he does get a reward for that. So the Gemara ends it with saying he gets a reward of somebody who's not commanded and does anyways. Meaning like this, the 7 mitzvahs, the obligation that it is an obligation that is not a command for it, so you get a reward for as it being not commanded. Now, by the way, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is unique in not holding from that. He holds actually that there was no nullification, so it's in here and things that way. There's a bunch of letters that went back and forth. The majority of the Buddha didn't agree with him, but that's his view, and so Lubavitcher Hasidim will not hold with what I'm saying now. But
it's nice to know.
Yeah, but the majority do hold that in fact it was nullified. So what does that mean? This gets into one of the things important, is that there had been a thing, if there was a Ger Toshav, there was an from Kabul with a Ger Toshav. Okay? A lot of poskim say, well, there is no Ger Toshav today. However, if a non-Jew makes a Kabul, he accepts that he's going to keep the 7 mitzvahs, they don't become a Ger Toshav, but it does change his status from not being commanded to doing to now being commanded to do it. Why? Because if you take upon yourself something like an oath, it's a neder, it's an oath, and even though non-Jews are not required to oath, with the laws of oaths don't apply, still, when doing it, it changes your status to be as if you were commanded. Just like Jewish people take upon themselves customs as an oath, it's commanded. It's almost like it's a biblical command to do it because we're completing and doing an oath. There's a problem. That's why a lot of rabbinic laws are accepted very strong, because by accepting it, it's basically accepting it. So what's the status now? The status, according to that, is that you're not commanded. But if you just do it stam, you're still getting a reward for it as somebody who's not commanded. But if you do a kabula, if you accept it upon yourself, then you're doing as if you were commanded, and so you get the reward for that.
Big difference.
It only has to do with the reward you're getting. It doesn't have to do with anything specifically. Okay. Now, with that, we sort of understand. Remember, the Rambam says to be from the Chassidim Olam, you have to do it because it says in the Torah. Why say you have to do it inside the Torah? Because if the 7 mitzvahs are nullified,
right,
then they don't exist as the 7 mitzvahs from before Sinai. They only exist as 7 mitzvahs after Sinai, which is something we all agree to, like Gemara and the Rambam, that it's only from after Sinai. So if you're doing it because it's in the Torah, I mean, you make a kabul, you're doing it because it's in the Torah requires you to do it, Hashem wants you to do it. You're doing that makes you the Chassidim Olam because you have taken it upon yourself to do it because of the Torah. Only because it's
wow. I think every B'nai Noach needs to hear this.
Okay. So now, let's go from there. So now that we discussed what basically the issues from Shavuos. Okay, we have the issues from Shavuos is basically it's a holiday of harvest, but if you read carefully the text, you see also that the giving of the Torah and Shavuos comes around the same time, and the rabbis are actually, from being careful with reading the language carefully, following what it is, it ends up that the 6th or the 7th of Sivan, which is when Shavuos usually comes out, is actually the same time. So the giving of the Torah and Shavuos were the exact same time. So what does it mean for Noahide? Okay, number one, obviously there's no anything that you could say you have to do, but recognizing that the rabbis say that it's a time we're being judged on fruits and stuff like that it's not such a bad idea to have that in mind. Just like, as I've said before, when Rosh Hashanah, we know from Rosh Hashanah that everybody's being judged. It sort of shows a little bit of intelligence to realize if you're being judged on something, you should sort of think about what you're doing.
It's a turning point of the year for sure.
So with regards to the harvest part of it, I think recognizing that at the beginning of the harvest, I mean, we're city people, we don't really realize it. Those of you who live in the country and see it, it's going to be easy to recognize. The harvest is beginning. You should pray to Hashem that the harvest should be good, the fruits of your roots and everything should be. Think about it, because that's the time of the year when it is. It's related to them. And of course, since if you need to, a lot of Noahides like to learn from the Torah. It's not such a bad idea that if you want to learn, make your special learning on just the specific things that have to do with Shavuos and the agricultural stuff, because then that's one way of having in mind that, relating this to you as a Noahide if you want to. And if you don't, that's fine.
I think it helps connect with making the world a better place and understanding the cycle. So many of us are disconnected from the cycle, and it's a good thing to understand along with the spiritual
The
message.
second part is dealing with the giving of the Torah. Now, as I pointed out, that's very important now, because since the view is that the Torah was, the 7 mitzvahs in a sense nullified, not the obligations there, but nullified the mitzvah aspect of it, not the obligation of it, but the mitzvah. With the giving of the Torah, it's a very big change. It's something different, and those who haven't done a kabbalah before through rabbis, might be a good idea to do it now, because that's definitely an appropriate time. And even if you had, between yourself and Hashem, you should renew your commitment to the Torah or Noahides, because this is the time the Torah was given. You might want to look into, specifically, spend some time looking at one of the books that deal with the laws of being a Noahide, or talking about some issues about that. Listening to some of my lectures from before.
Another shameless plug, Rabbi.
No, I'm talking about the lectures I'm giving here about the Noahide laws.
No, very
good. Something to remind you. You're not keeping a holiday or anything like that, but just I know this time of the year. Since most Noahides have come to Christian and I'm reading it, they go, you don't want to be celebrating it like that, but there are things that still relate to you because of it. Or you can relate to and do it without making any kind of rituals. If you're going to be reading, then you should specifically have in mind to read. I want to read this part of the Torah that deals with that, and I want to read specifically about laws. Rabbi Weiner's book, Divine Code. You can pick that up and look at that, or something like that, or obviously listen to the lectures I'm giving. I haven't finished yet, so there's not a whole thing. Maybe somebody will decide to write all this stuff down and make a book out of it and whatever. But the point is that it's a time which relates as a Noahide. You can think about this isn't a time that I should do it because that's what's going on in the world. So it's not an obligation. You don't have to do it. You could sleep all day. Just take a sleep all day. Go see a baseball game. Of course, there's no baseball game this time of year. So
hey, we're talking about bringing the hockey back here in Canada now. So. But all I can say is, Rabbi, I live in an area that is a very wine country, fruit producing, and everything's been blossomed now for a number of weeks. And you're right, the fruit is just starting to pop up. It's a sensitive.
You're just going to start to get things that you can take and you start eating from it, right? Because this is the beginning of that's the first fruits. This is the time of the year. So if you're attuned to such things, you recognize it. This is the appropriate time to pray to Hashem that the harvest should be good and whatever. Especially maybe somebody who's listening to me is a farmer. I don't know. It's quite possible.
But more so that the Torah was given.
So that's basically dealing with what the holiday. The holiday has two things. Basically, harvest stuff and that. There are some other things that are very interesting that we see in some things that I'll just mention. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do anything about it. But one thing is that Jewish tradition has it that King David died on Shavuos.
Really?
And because of that, for example, we read the book of Ruth. And there's a lot of people who say Psalms on that, just as remembrance of King David. So King David, and also very interestingly, the founder of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov, died on Shavuos also.
Wow.
His family said there's somewhat of a disagreement as to when it was. I know the family of the Baal Shem Tov, his grandson, and others, and many others, held it was the first day. There was some that held it was the second day, but on Shavuos. So there's something like that. Then there's something a little more esoteric if you want to get onto it. We're talking about that you should pray for the fruits of the trees because this time of year. There's a verse in the Torah when it's talking about not cutting down trees. It says ki udem eitz hasuda, I think is the word. Is a man a fruit of the tree? And in fact, some Sforim do actually look at man as if it's like a fruit, like a tree, and say because of that, since it's a time that you're supposed to pray for fruits, you should pray for your children and stuff like that.
Which is something you should do regularly, anyways. Right. But it makes a special.
Many times people don't remember such things, so that's what it is. Okay, actually, I finished much quicker than I thought I would. That's because I didn't have any questions here to look at. I couldn't get the questions thing looking.
Well, Rabbi, we've hit double digits and watching us still live on YouTube. But all I can say is that you captivate their interest, and I picked up and brought home a depth and lesson that just makes sense. It's just tells us about the whole festival and why people do what they do, why the Jewish folks do what they do, but the links behind it, and more so the giving of Torah. And, I wish I knew exactly where the sources were for the nullification of the Noahide laws, those that say that it was nullified versus maybe those that say it wasn't.
It's in the Talmud of Bava Kama and the commentaries, and in Avodah Zarah, the commentaries are also.
Okay. So there's a place to look for sure. And it just makes good sense, especially as a B'nai Noach, that we understand that even if it was or even if it wasn't, the giving of Torah, though, has a whole new angle on this, and that, you brought it alive today for why even the Rambam would have said it the way that he did, that we accept it for the sake of Torah, because it's there. I mean, rather than just because it's a logical notion. I think there's just something well rounded in today's message. And have you got any closing words, Rabbi? Since we still got lots of people there watching, but nobody's throwing any questions.
I don't see any comments here even. That's fine.
Well, we're joined by my friend Gal down in California. Like I said, Scotty was here. We got Zekiah with us, and my friend Veronica from Washington is with us again, and several other people. It's always nice to have a good group, but I think that this message that you talked about today is something that this could be a staple. I think there's something here that it gives an explanation that is definitely.
I finally found things here.
You've kept their attention that nobody's asked any questions. If anybody there has any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment box right now. And Jeffrey is saying, Rabbi, he's saying, is there any information available about Noah's great-grandfather Enoch?
Oh, that's a very big question. He has a very big place in a lot of things. He was taken up into heaven. Jewish tradition is actually his body was basically taken away and he was turned into an angel. What do you call an angel? We call him malach. The word angel is actually not a Hebrew word, and the connotation from the word angel is such that it really separates it from what it really means in the Tanakh and the Torah. The word for angel is the word malach. Malach just means a messenger.
Messenger.
Okay? There are malachim, there are messengers that are human messengers, and there are messengers that are divine messengers. Okay? Sometimes there's divine messengers, and these are people that Hashem has around him. There's a whole heavenly host up there you find there. Book of Daniel talks about it also. Seems like they have some fights going on there also. In the Book of Daniel, chapter 10, 11, there's a discussion of the angel Michael, we call it Machuel, who is fighting for the Jewish people against the angels of other nations. It's very interesting. But people don't get into that kind of stuff very much. But that's they're up there. So anyways, so he got turned into an angel, one of the most important angels are there in rabbinic literature more. We don't find much. So that's
about Enoch. Well, that's awesome. Rabbi, here's another comment by somebody who goes by the handle Shepherd's Outcry. They're asking, should I fear not following the Noahide laws?
Well, let's put it this way.
Fear or awe? I don't know how they're.
It's an interesting question because Judaism is, while we do believe in having fear of God and doing things because of that, Christianity is totally based on fear. Whereas in Judaism, that's not what it is. It's what Hashem wants you to do. So you should do it because of him. I mean, as the Rambam says, the Hasidic Emes Olam, those who do the mitzvahs, have a place in the world to come because of that, because basically Hashem judges you based on your actions. So if you do it, you have a place where to come. And it means that if you don't do it, then you don't have a place. Or if you're really bad, then you might have a place that you don't want to have. So it's okay. So I mean, yeah, we do. Judaism definitely believes in reward and punishment. I mean, that's one of the fundamentals. We are not hung up on it like Christians are, because basically, it's about what you do. So if you get hung up on, mistakes or stuff like that, you're never going to improve yourself, obviously.
Right.
So you have to always look forward to improving. And when you're looking forward to improving, you can't really concentrate on what happened before because that just really messes you up more. So in a sense, yeah. I mean, if you're concerned about what's going to happen, then yeah. If you're not worried about it, then don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't be neurotic. That's for sure. You've always taught us that. But one thing that you brought out today was even during the certain sacrifices about rejoicing, about the purpose behind all that in those few verses. I believe it was in Deuteronomy. Was it 19? Am I incorrect? Deuteronomy, you were talking, and all this was done, and it said to rejoice before Hashem, and I think that's a good note for B'nai Noach to realize that, hey, we're here and we're alive in this world for a reason and a purpose, and we should be rejoiceful when we do anything, and more than that, be a positive, rejoicing person in the world that you're in. Not a fearful, afraid, concerned. Truly live, and this is one of the great releases that I found when I left Christianity, Rabbi. To me, it was like a weight fell off my shoulders, and I says, oh, now I can just live. But I love Hashem, and I want to know more of the Torah, but I don't want to know more that crushes me to powder. I want to know to cleave and get closer to Hashem. So I want to thank you for asking that question out there. You've got some great teachings from Scotty down in Tennessee, and Jeffrey says, thank you, Rabbi. Any closing words then for your Shavuos special?
No, that's it.
Straightforward as always, Rabbi. You're always straightforward, and I do appreciate you taking the time to share with us as always. And I hope you'll continue to prepare words for us, and it means so much to me as I learn things even today I hadn't heard before. And I thank you for taking the time to just show me the background there in behind everything that was going on and why the count actually got from here to there. And to me, it was jumping off the pages. I was trying to follow along with you, especially the way the thunderings and the lightnings were just about to come, and the way you describe it as that's the giving of the Torah. And in all my years of studying, I'm thinking the giving of the Torah was, was it the Ten Commandments? No, it's more than that. There's something where everybody heard, and it's just huge, Rabbi. And I want to thank you for sharing with us. So hopefully, somebody else is asking. How can I connect my career of sculpting with Hashem? Ooh, because at most focus in problems. You know what? I'm not clear on the question. So, Zakia, you could clarify that question.
I'm not either, but
yeah, I'll make sure. Zakia, feel free to think about that question, clarify it, put it in the comments, or feel free to email me or meet me on Facebook, or even reach out to Rabbi Shulman, or rewrite it down. That way, we'll make sure he gets to read it next week. You also got other people saying, Todah, Rabbi. They appreciate it. So until our next broadcast, folks, we're going to sign out. I want to thank Rabbi Shulman for sharing with us today about Shavuos and how it could relate to the Noahide. So bye for now, folks.